Happy July, Penn State fans. It's the first Wednesday in July edition of BWI Live. That's Thomas Frank Carr. I'm Greg Pickle. We're off to a roaring start. My headphones just made the dying noise. So we'll see how long.
No.
Yeah, we'll see how long they last, but that's okay. We have an hour of Penn State football talk, whether they last 5 minutes or 60, to get you through to the July 4th holiday weekend. T. Frank, as we all know, there's a couple things that happen in this first week of July. Commitment season is well underway across college football. It started earlier this year than it has in years past, but it continues this week and into this weekend. And the other thing is we get even closer to the start of college football preseason camps. Media days for various conferences, including the Big Ten, are right around the corner. I say all this to say the end of the offseason is near.
Stop scaring me. I got so much stuff I want to do. Don't do that. Don't do that to me, Greg.
Well, I will try my best not to over the next 60 minutes. All right, we have a lot to get to today. June is obviously in the books for the Penn State football program. We're going to cover what we learned about the Nittany Lions. We're going to take a look at the start and or I guess continuation of our opponent preview series by taking a closer look at the Oregon Ducks, who come to Beaver Stadium for the whiteout game on September 27th. The first true test for Penn State will take place then. And then from there, we're going to get into a little bit more of buy or sell. I think everything is just a little bit of a mess. No, I'm sorry. Best case, worst case. We're going to close it out with the BWI mailbag, and we're looking forward to any questions you may have for that segment to close the show as well. Morning to everyone in the chat. If you're watching live on YouTube, if you're listening on demand, either on Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your podcast, or YouTube, hello to you as well. Thanks for joining us for this edition of BWI Live. T. Frank. It is a time of year when a lot of stuff in terms of season preview material is coming out. And if anyone listening or watching missed the news, Brett McMurphy, longtime college football reporter at a national level, previously with the Action Network, joined On 3 yesterday, July 1st. And if you follow Brett's work, you know he breaks a lot of news. You know he also is big and has always been big in the bowl game and postseason prediction world. And he posted his first ones over at Blue White Illustrated and On 3 on Tuesday. We're going to talk about it here on Wednesday's show. T. Frank, I guess the first thought I have is, again, it's another sign the season is approaching. And it's also, we'll get into the specifics here in a sec, but also another indication of another person who thinks Penn State is in position not just to make the college football playoff, but also possibly win the Big Ten.
Yeah, and I thought that was really interesting that was the kind of where Penn State landed for McMurphy, because, you know, we do a lot of looking at Penn State and looking at only Penn State and not really knowing what the rest of these teams are dealing with themselves. And I guess I'm saying that given that I just spent most of yesterday and today looking at Oregon and kind of getting the lay of the land for that team and understanding where their strengths and weaknesses are and what they did this offseason. So it's really interesting to see like a consensus build that Penn State is a front runner, maybe the favorite, maybe it's a co-favorite with Ohio State to be the Big Ten champion this year, which is not where we would normally have Penn State. Normally they'd be that third team or second team fighting to get to the number one spot. And I think it comes back to a lot of the veterancy on this team. We generally look for veterancy in teams, the older teams that you know what those players are bringing, and that's where we start. Now, the change is going to be how many elite players developed this offseason that were younger and are making a name for themselves this year. That's always the thing that nobody really knows just yet. But yeah, Penn State's got a pretty good team. Like, they're starting 22. People seem to really like it.
Yeah, so before we get into the specifics, you make a good segue to Ryan's question in the chat, which says, am I a jaded Penn State fan, or is it real that I think we are overhyped when you look at our actual roster and its holes? And he points out holes at receiver, defensive line, and linebacker. So I wrote about this yesterday for my column in the upcoming edition of Blue White Illustrated's preseason football magazine, which comes out later this month. And I think it's a fair question because there's two sides to this coin. The first one is the 50,000 foot view, which is what is happening at the national level right now of what teams return, where they have star power and where they maybe have some question marks. And right now, a lot of the focus in the college football media world is focused on the star power and who you return and the veteran players. And so I think it's a fair question. It's one I've heard from a lot of Penn State fans, either on the Lions Den message board at bluewhiteillustrated.com or in social media or just, on the street somewhere is, does the issues that Penn State looks to have on its roster, are they being discussed enough? Are they being talked about enough? And I guess where I land on it, T. Frank, I'll be curious to see where you do, is I think on the hyper local level, it is. I don't know if it is nationally, but that's just kind of the way these things work this time of year. And I'm maybe not as I don't know if fearful is the right word, but I don't know if I'm as concerned as maybe Ryan might be or some others might be about some of the spots that Penn State has issues. One of the mailbag questions we'll get into later on the show is a position Penn State can't afford to have an injury at. So I don't want to get too far into that conversation. But the position Quincy points out, the receivers need to play better, no question. The opinion of many is that if Penn State's going to win the Big Ten or be in position to have a bye for the college football playoff, it's because the receivers that it brought in, combined with the ones it returns, are better than what Penn State had on the field a year ago. And the going right now seems to be that those transfer guys, T. Frank, are guaranteed to perform at a higher level than what Penn State had in the receivers room a year ago. So, Ryan, I don't think you're jaded. I think you're realistic. I also think that there's I think a lot of Penn State fans right now are struggling with being in the position of, I guess you could say, off-season power, whether it's being put number one in some people's top 25s, whether it's being kind of praised across the internet and across the print magazine world for what Penn State returns, the veteran players that you mentioned just a second ago, T. Frank. So do you think Penn State's being overhyped based on that whole conversation, the holes it has versus what it returns?
No, it's just that we don't know. Like, that's kind of what I said. Like, we don't know who's going to take that transformational step to go from maybe a role player, somebody was in front of them last year, and then turns out they're even better than that other player, and it changes the dynamics of a team. Like looking at Oregon, there are aspects of that team that are question marks, and they didn't fix every single hole on their roster this offseason. They definitely added talent, but we don't know how the new mix is going to work together. So Penn State has a lot of known variables, so that provides that stability. And, whether you think Drew Aller is the best quarterback in the country or not, he's good enough to win a national championship with. Like, we've seen worse quarterbacks win national championships, and I'm not going to argue that point. That's a real point. The rest of the team is really good. Now, is it historically like Georgia 2017 defense or whatever year it was they had, like, an insanely good defense? No, like, the team is not overall that good, but they do bring back a lot of star power. And to the question about the receivers specifically, that's a part of the equation why reporters are ranking them number one, because they intentionally went out and got 3 receivers, 2 of which we know about, Trevor Pena and Devontae Ross, from that, like, really a lot of knowledge of what they can do. They've played full seasons. They've been heavily involved in their offense. And then Kyron Hudson, a guy who I think got banged up a little bit last year, but was like, everyone really liked Kyron Hudson as a role player in that USC offense. So they have known quantities at receiver. I don't think people are really, to your point, I don't think people are really looking all that hard at the 3rd and 4th defensive tackle for any of these teams.
Right.
I don't think anyone's really looking at, like, okay, so you've got Dom DeLuca starting at middle linebacker or, at linebacker. Check mark, you've got a starter returning. So, but nobody's really going to know, like, is he they're not looking so deeply at some of these position battles. So yeah, I think there is a perception bias of, if the people that are looking at just the surface level all over the place are saying Penn State is one of the, if not best team in the Big Ten, there's validity in that. Like, there is a reasonable expectation. Now, that doesn't mean that's how it plays out. Injuries happen, all those things. Players don't live up to your expectations. All that stuff. That's all real. But the work Penn State has done to put themselves in this position has paid off. Like, it is like they have assembled a team that on the surface level, it seems like it has very few obvious weaknesses. Now, it's always about your answers. How many answers do you have? And do you have an answer against every single team's style and scheme? And maybe you don't have 100% the best answer for every style and scheme, but do you have enough? And I think that's a fair way to look at where Penn State is they have a pretty resilient roster based on what we've seen from, even the two deep, I'd say. And they're obviously like, you want all these things to be bulletproof, but they're not going to be. That's not college football. That's not football in general.
Right. And one of the things I wrote in that column I mentioned earlier as well is the idea that this conversation seems to always leave out the fact that Penn State went and stole Jim Knowles from Ohio State and is reported, paying him the most of any coordinator in college football. So when you talk about finding answers, obviously it's a player game, right? But the more answers your coordinator has based on his roster, the better off those players are usually going to be. They have to go and execute. Z-Man makes a good point in the chat. Nobody this year is clear dominating number one team in the preseason. There's no question about that. All you have to do is go read the various polls that are out there to come to that conclusion. And the reason is the quarterback question marks. Alan makes a good point in the chat too. Penn State's a talented team with a returning quarterback who is talent that makes it many people's number one. Yeah, that's kind of just it. Like, go look at some of the preseason quarterback rankings, not just for the Big Ten, for example. You have guys in the top 5 who have not either started or played a significant amount of snaps yet. There's a lot of projection across the Big Ten in terms of its quarterback play this year. And then, Texas, obviously, with Arch Manning, there's projection there. He's expected to be good. We'll have to wait and see.
Bryce Underwood.
Yep.
I think a freshman quarterback or a guy that Dante Moore, who's starting for the first time. These are what we're talking about. The variables that I think early in the season you count against a team, but could end up being a strength, and we just don't know yet because those guys haven't taken a snap and played a meaningful game yet.
Yeah, and Clemson with its quarterback situation, one of the teams people are focusing in on for that reason as well. Anyway, back to Brett McMurphy's first bowl projections, playoff projections 4-on-3. He has Penn State winning the Big Ten and getting a bye as the number 2 seed, where it would face Alabama in the quarterfinals. He has Penn State winning that game before losing to Georgia, who he has as the eventual national champion, in the semifinals. So I think that's pretty on par with what many people see for Penn State this year. A trip to the semifinals for sure, a better than average chance to get a bye, and some have them making it to the college football playoff championship game, which is at Hard Rock Stadium, where, of course, Penn State's season ended last year.
Yeah.
Some have them losing in the semifinals, but that's pretty much the going rate at this point, T. Frank, for Penn State predictions in 2025. Yeah.
So there is a school of thought of just get into the tournament, right? And then anything can happen. And once you are in that situation, we can find teams that surprise us and end up as national champions. Not that Ohio State was untalented, but the disjointed way their season went from the talent versus production throughout the year, including the loss to Michigan. I don't think anyone expected them to be the national champion. I think there were a lot of people that probably had money on Texas and a couple other schools that were in the tournament last year. And Oregon, by the way, Oregon was the number 1 team for a lot of people, to win that national championship, given how they played against Ohio State earlier in the year. So I just, I don't know if I believe that necessarily in terms of, I don't want to go back to a 4-team playoff, but I do think with the lack of institutional parity in college football, there might not be 12 teams that can do that, right? Like, I don't believe in Cinderella in football. Boise State didn't have a shot last year. That's just like, there's going to be teams that once you get to certain points, those weaknesses are exposed, the answers run out. And I just think that there are teams that probably have more talent than others. So I guess I'm talking a general point about the playoff, not Penn State within it, but they are talented enough pending injuries and all those things that they should be, in contention to be one of those teams that could win it all. Like, they have enough talent that if they get into the tournament, anything could happen. But I just don't know that that's true for 12 teams in college football.
Yeah, no, not at the moment, especially when you talk about that group of 5 team and or teams that may get in having to
even
play.
Arizona State last year, right? Like, right. I mean, they played well, but no one expected them to actually make a championship game.
Right. Yeah, it comes down to, in more years than not, no matter how many teams you have in the playoff, there's only going to be a select handful that truly have the depth, that survive the injury, roulette wheel, etc., and enough skill, obviously, and talent at the key positions to go on and win. You might get some upsets here and there, of course, but yeah, I think you make a good point. When it comes to who makes the semifinals, who has a chance to win the championship game by winning that game and then going to win it, certainly there's no doubt in my mind, T. Frank, that there's only a select handful at this point in time in college football that can do it.
Yeah, and here's the thing. If you want to go watch all this happen in person, especially we're going to be talking about Oregon here in just a second, we're talking about the whiteout game, you should definitely get some tickets. And Where you get your tickets is just as important as getting your tickets. And if you've been looking for a reliable source of Penn State football tickets, Jim at TixmanJim.com, formerly PSUTixman.com, has been running his ticket exchange in Wilmington, Delaware for over 25 years. Every buyer is handled with courtesy, respect, and every ticket purchased is guaranteed. Proceeds are used to fund the PSU AA Chapter Scholarship Fund and the PSU Levi Lamb Fund for athletic scholarships. So, good cause, good opportunity, and good tickets. Like you're in the building for one of the biggest, most important games of Penn State's career, Penn State season, and maybe even a decade. I don't know. Like, it's a very important year for Penn State this year. Get your 2025 season tickets now. It doesn't have to be for the whiteout game. It could be, don't wait, go to Nevada, go to, is it you? Which one is it, Greg? Which non-important Florida team is it in the beginning?
Florida International.
Florida International. I wanted to say Florida Atlantic, and I knew that wasn't right. Florida International. Get all your tickets right now. TixmanJim.com or email Jim at TixmanJim@gmail.com. Great tailgating games if you want to go to those games. Have a good time. You know, there's not going to be anything you really need to worry about in those games. And here's the thing. I always joke with fans, like, if you want absolution, go get religion, because that's not what football is. Pretty close, though, with Nevada. Like, if you want to go to a game, Penn State's going to win, you're going to have guaranteed a good time. Now, if anxiety and cortisol and stress mean a good time, then maybe you want to go to that game in November against Nebraska or whatever. There's a lot of great options on the 2024 home slate. So check out Tixman Jim. Appreciate him being a sponsor here on the show.
Yes, thank you so much, Jim, for sponsoring this edition of BWI Live. Let's get into a little bit. We're going to get into Oregon here in just a second, but a quick recap of June, which, of course, was just put in the books yesterday. The rev share era started in college football on July 1, so June, the last month in the history of college athletics without such a thing formally in place. It was an interesting month for Penn State. You and Nate and Sean on Tuesday, and you and Sean and Ryan on Thursday have beat the recruiting talk. Everyone's heard everything they probably need and or want to hear about Penn State's June recruiting efforts. So I won't belabor the point there. Obviously, Penn State had a less than ideal month. I don't know if it was, there's obviously a chance to flip guys down the road. So maybe it won't end up looking as bad in December as it maybe does or feel to some right now. Yeah. But again, I don't want to belabor that point. You all listen to enough of us talk about that, read about that, things like that. So we'll spare you on this July 2nd edition of the BWI Live show. So that was obviously one big part of June, probably the biggest storyline of June. Another thing that came out in June, new point spreads. So you mentioned
this is what I was interested in. Yeah, this is what I wanted you to talk about. I wanted to get into this because I think this is interesting. Setting the level expectation for some of these games that, especially later in the season, I think is super interesting.
Yeah, so there's a total of 5 points, Penn State point spreads now posted at FanDuel. Penn State is a 45.5 point favorite over Nevada. It is a 3.5 point home favorite against Oregon. It is a 10.5 point road favorite at Iowa. It is a 3.5 point underdog at Ohio State. And it is a 16.5 point favorite when it hosts Indiana in November. So one of the things that I wrote in a different story, not in this particular one that T. Frank has on the screen now, if you are watching the YouTube version of this show, is what it tells me is that, as you sort of probably figured, Penn State's going to be a double-digit spread, and not just a double-digit spread, but 2 touchdowns or more, and in probably more cases than not this year, depending on how things shake out, maybe even 3 touchdowns or more in a lot of its games this year. And as anyone who follows the betting lines know, James Franklin and Penn State typically very, very good as double-digit favorites, which is another reason, again, why Penn State is viewed as one of the teams that should be in strong position at the end of the regular season to claim a strong postseason spot. So, yeah, I thought these numbers were interesting. Basically, the one thing that came up over on the Lions Den message board, which of course you can join and get all of our premium content at Blue White Illustrated for $1 for the first week and then build annually from there, is the fact that basically FanDuel was making Oregon roughly a pick 'em. I mean, maybe if it was on a neutral field, Oregon a slight favorite if you think they give more than the typical 3.5 points for home field because of the whiteout. Yeah. And then Penn State at Ohio State is essentially the same thing, where Penn State might be a small favorite on a neutral field. Thought that was interesting. At the same time, it's July, And these odds makers would not be in business if they didn't know how to protect themselves for future unpredictable events, while also getting you and us to talk about these things in July. So that didn't really shock me all that much. And none of the other ones really did either. I think that, we talked about it on a previous show. Iowa is a game that's going to be tricky for Penn State. I think it's not crazy to think that by the time that game rolls around, T. Frank, a lot of people would be very interested in the Hawkeyes getting 10.5 at home.
They have a hard time scoring points.
I'm with you. I'm not saying it'd be hard for me. I wouldn't be interested, I don't think. But I could see people being interested because the chat's about to blow up with, Kinnick this and at Iowa that, and it's just kind of ingrained, especially in Penn State fans, but a lot of college football fans head that just some strange things you don't always see coming can happen when you go to Kinnick. Yeah. So I could see that being appealing by the time that game rolls around. Of course, the flip side is if the offense of Iowa does what the offense of Iowa typically does, which they have a new quarterback, another year with their coordinator, maybe they are more than what they typically are. That line could also go the other way.
Here's the thing about Iowa. Here's the thing about Iowa. They make it hard for everyone to win. They make it hard for you to win, but their offense makes it hard for them to win. So it's just like these games are, that's why they're so hard, is like their defense is good, their scheme is good, but if you have a competent offense with elite talent, there is a certain amount of football takes over at a certain point. And if you understand what they're going to do, and typically, I'm not saying that like they don't have wrinkles and things from year to year, but if you understand the classic tenets of football, and you understand how zones work, and you understand how zone matching works, and you understand how coverage rotation works, and then you understand what leverage means for a defense, at a certain point, Iowa, even on defense, they're going to have some first-round draft picks. They're going to have some NFL players. They're not going to have 11 of them. So Penn State, who has a veteran-laden team, which we just started the first 15 minutes of the show talking about, they should be able to handle that. Like, they should be, even on the road at Kinnick, they should be able to handle that. It's just going to be if the offense has a down night. I don't know. Like we'll see what the D line and all that stuff plays out for Penn State during the year, because that's the only way Iowa can stay within a game is if you will allow them to run, which again, the way they run the football and running the football in general, if you understand, I'm saying from a player perspective, if you understand the basic fundamentals of football and you understand that numbers and leverage versus the run is kryptonite, then it's not hard. It's not a hard game to figure out how to win. And so you just have to out-execute the other team. Penn State's the only thing I'd say is that Penn State's strength is in the secondary, and we do have those questions about the front seven this year. That would be an avenue for Iowa to stay in that game. But if Penn State's struggling with Iowa in the run game, I do think that bodes poorly for them later in the year. Now, if it's a battle, that's fine, because that's what they do. It's the one thing they do. But if that would be I would see that as an alarm bell if they were to struggle in key areas kind of in that game, within reason. I'm not going to it's all off if they win by 7 points or whatever. Right. But still, I just think I struggle. I don't know if I should say this out loud. I struggle respecting Iowa's plan because it is self-defeating at a certain point. And I understand they have to play that way because of where they're located and kind of what they have access to in modern college football. And I do understand that, but I guess I'm always of a growth mindset, and I feel like Iowa hasn't been able to grow since 1999, 2010, maybe. I don't know. It just seems like it's something you should be able to beat if you're Penn State.
Well, before Penn State goes to Iowa, it will host Oregon in a game that will tell us a lot about what this Penn State team will look like in 2025. After the 3 non-conference games plus a September bye, Penn State will welcome Oregon to town, and it's the team that we preview first today on our look at Penn State opponents in 2025. The Ducks, of course, will come to Beaver Stadium for the whiteout game, a rematch of last year's Big Ten title game. Kickoff is set for 7:30 p.m. on NBC. It will be a primetime whiteout, which Penn State fans, this is where you go into the chat and tell us how happy you are that it's the best opponent on the home schedule and a primetime kick. So please, while you're doing that, remember, like and subscribe, please. Yes. We appreciate that. And if you're listening on the podcast version, leave us your thoughts as well. No noon kickoff for the whiteout, and it is in prime time, and it is against the best opponent on the schedule. T. Frank, you dove into Oregon recently. I have as well. We have some specifics to get into, but I just want to get your initial takeaway, the first thought you had when you wrapped up your prep on the Ducks in entering the 2025 season.
Well, so wrapped it up for this show in particular. There's still a lot of work to do, but it's just like, oh my God, they spent so much money. That's the first thing I thought, because you look at this transfer portal class. I think it was one of, if not the best transfer portal class in college football last year. So we talk about the way they spend money to get recruits. It's not just recruits. Like you look at what they did, what they lost last year specifically along the offensive line. They get a guy like Isaiah World, Alex Harkey, and Emmanuel Pregnan up front. Those three players, I don't know that all three are going to start. I don't know how that's all going to work out, but at least two of those guys were seen as top transfer portal targets at tackle and along the offensive line. They had needs, and they're just able to address their needs in the portal, and they're able to get the guys that they want. It's not as big as last year's transfer portal class. I think they are starting to level out a little bit as they've recruited, and Dan Lanning's been there a little bit longer. But this is just an example of what they do. Is so they go and get Theron Johnson and Dylan Thinneman from Purdue and Northwestern to fill in the secondary, because they lost some guys in the secondary. This is the thing with Oregon is, if you can buy margin of error, then your job as a coach is so much easier. And we'll explain their scheme and what they want to do and why they need all these pieces, the way that they kind of construct this offense. But it's just kind of like, of course, like I just opened the book, and the first thing is, wow, Nike spent a lot of money on these players in the transfer portal. Of course, they checked off a bunch of needs given what they lost last year. Now, not all of them, importantly, not all of them. But I think offensive line specifically is an area they did a lot of work this offseason.
Yeah, the Ducks, as you mentioned, needed to do a lot of work in the transfer portal because they do not return a ton of production, especially on the offensive side of the ball. So they're returning leaders, just to give you a rundown of those quick. Running back Noah Whittington, 540 yards and 6 touchdowns last year, make him the leading rushing option back. Dante Moore, obviously we all know him from the recruiting world. He looks to be the new starter at Oregon. He only threw for 49 yards last year. Receiver, a position that Penn State fans know well about how good they were last year because of the fact that they were so successful in the Big Ten title game. Evan Stewart, top leading receiver for them, 613 yards, 5 touchdowns. They do have a little bit more returning production on defense. But yeah, I think there's no question that it's not accurate, I don't think, to say Oregon's in the opposite situation of Penn State in terms of where its returning roster's at compared to Penn State. But at the same time, there's definitely a difference between the two in terms of what Penn State was able to retain and what Oregon lost to the NFL. And that is going to be obviously the thing that is followed the most closely in the lead up to this game is, what does Oregon's new pieces look like in action over the course of their start to their season?
Now, they had a good recruiting class, but the three that I want to highlight here, and I got a chance to dip into, they're one of the few teams that has their spring game on video. I think Fox did the game. So there was at least a little bit of advanced scouting that's applicable to like who's lining up where and how these guys are playing and where you see from those players on the field. So Dakarian Moore is the consensus 5-star receiver. I think he's more of a slot receiver, 5-star plus receiver that they picked up this year. Naeem Offord, 5-star plus corner, and then Trey McNutt at safety, a 5-star safety. Those are the three guys, I think, from the freshman class right off the bat that you could see having a role in this on this team. And of course, then there's guys down the list that are a part of the conversation as well. I don't think we need to get into every single one of their players in the class of 2025. But when we're talking about who's new, what are the variables we don't know, I would say that these are the guys where you would find the most new variables from the class of 2025. There's a couple other guys maybe under the radar that might have a role within the team, but we'll figure that out, in September when they actually play some games. But Those are the names, and I would say Evan Stewart's injury this offseason.
Yeah,
puts
I need to correct that. Yes,
mark.
he was the leading returner at receiver. I do need to correct that. I appreciate no one really yelling at me in the chat. So if you are yelling at me listening,
the conversation wasn't over yet, Greg. Like
yes.
we were still in the middle of it. You were just leaving it for me to say, so I sound smart. That's all.
I was. So that's a big loss for them, and. So it just interests me what Dan Lanning does for an encore this year. I really respect him as a head coach. I think he obviously can acquire talent and then develop it. He has a track record of doing that. They recruit very well, both the high school level and the portal. But then you got to get all those pieces to fit. And so I think it's just so interesting when this game falls on the schedule because Oregon opens its 2025 season, I think, with Montana State. Yep. And then they are playing Oklahoma State. They have their Big Ten opener before Penn State. They go to Northwestern September 13th. And then they face Oregon State in a rivalry game September 20th before then turning around and coming to Penn State on the 27th. So even from a schedule perspective, we're talking about the roster differences, T. Frank, but even from a schedule perspective, quite different in terms of what kind of start to September both teams have. Penn State is facing 3 out-of-conference foes first. Oregon will obviously have Northwestern. Obviously, we don't know what Northwestern will be, but certainly I think
it's
probably
a 9 a.m. start time, Pacific time, which sucks.
Yeah, never know, but certainly probably a better, it's better test than what Penn State is probably going to face in the non-conference. But then Penn State gets a bye. Without question. So there's a difference there as well. All right, so that's some of the names to know for the Oregon Ducks. I think we kind of covered this next section, but like you said, restocked the offensive line in the secondary. They added playmakers, but the question marks is really what the conversation, drives this conversation about where you put Oregon in the pecking order, not just for the Big Ten nationally, or just not just the Big Ten, but also nationally in 2025.
So let's start. I'm going to start with, I think the most interesting part is the D-line. They have a couple of returning starters, but they lost a lot of the names that kind of made that defensive line what it was, especially Derek Harmon, the first-round draft pick. I think Jamari Caldwell was a little bit underrated. He went, I think, 84th overall or something like that in the NFL draft. I think that makes him a third-round draft pick as their nose tackle, who is a big body that could move, was nimble. I think he's maybe a little bit overweight, but a guy that was an underrated contributor to that D-line. And then the guy that I think was overhyped was Birch, number 1, the hybrid D-end. This is a group that doesn't get pressure generally from a front four anyway. Pressure is not really a part of what I see from their DNA. They've got bigger DNs. They're more about control of the line of scrimmage than they are about all-out pressure like Penn State with speed rushers and explosiveness on the outside. I think that's one area to see if they develop that, because they obviously are recruiting, as you mentioned, at a very high level, and some of those young guys or up-and-coming players might be able to take a step and be that for this D-line. But I think the front seven, it's fair to say there's a question about them replacing their Mike linebacker as well. So that D-line in front seven, I think, is the biggest question. I don't think Bear Alexander on his third team in the transfer portal is going to be the answer at D-tackle this year. I'm sorry. I just don't think that at this point that guy, despite what he was as a recruit, is going to be coming in and being the number 1 defensive tackle. So there's going to have to be some depth and development from some of those younger guys. And then I will get to the quarterback last, because I actually think that's less of a variable than the receivers. So they've got a lot of talent, and I don't, just looking at their recruiting again, Jermaine McClellan, 69th overall player in 2024, DeCorian Moore, number 1 wide receiver this past class. They bring in Malik Benson, who is a highly rated transfer portal receiver. And then they got some guys returning, Gary Bryant Jr., and just other players that are highly rated or have been on the roster for a while. There's a lot of talent, but not a lot of proven production. Not a lot of guys also that are on that, turning from a redshirt freshman to a redshirt sophomore, kind of as veteran players. So I think that's the biggest question on offense for them. They reloaded at tight end. I think that's a pretty good group. And then the quarterback, redshirt sophomore, I think Dante Moore is. And there's 2 aspects of this, which kind of bleeds into the next thing of like, what do they want to do on offense? This is a kind of a quarterback friendly offense. There's not a lot of complex downfield passing. There's a lot of option plays, and high school quarterbacks run option plays. So the talent is there for Dante Moore. I mean, I was wildly impressed when at one point he was talking to Penn State, and then I flipped on his film and like, oh wow, this is a really good football player. transfers to Oregon because, of course, he does. And I think he's in position to be good this year. Like I know he's a first-time starter, and there's going to be things, but I'm thinking he's going to be up to the task. Basically, it's going to be for Oregon, do their receivers develop in time to match the rest of the offense? And does that not sound familiar, Greg? Does that not sound very familiar to Penn State fans?
It sure does. Yeah, Malik Benson's the guy that I have my eye on. Florida State transfer, I think, is a really intriguing player and I think is a perfect fit for this offense. So he's the kind of the guy I have circled at this point in time. But they, of course, have some other ones. The Evan Stewart injury will shake up that receivers room, and who comes out on top, we'll have a better idea after preseason camp. But, yeah, Dante Moore is obviously a quarterback who, again, if you follow any kind of recruit, or just college football in general, you know who he is, know his past, and fits in this offense well on paper, at least. We'll see what it looks like in action. But I think you have a baseline assumption that the Oregon offense, maybe it won't be as explosive as it's been in the past this year, but I'm going to have to see it to believe it, that this offense is kind of one that plods along and that they don't have enough
they got
speed and athleticism to cause you problems. So a lot of new faces in new places, but certainly I think the track record with Dan Lanning and his staff, you give them the benefit of the doubt that, again, maybe they have a lot to replace on offense, no question. But they should still be among the Big Ten's most explosive offenses. Certainly it looks like they will be on paper. But again, you need everything to fit. But yeah, you make a good point about the receivers room when we're talking similarities and differences with Penn State. And they're not alone in that, those two teams in the Big Ten and across the country. There's not a whole lot of schools with a Jeremiah Smith leading the charge. And so certainly some have more of a pecking order in their receivers room than others, but that's what the early part of September is for. And there's no question, T. Frank, both of these schools by that time will want to have a better idea of who their go-to guys are on offense. And so that's a good segue to what Oregon wants to do on offense. You broke it down on film. Let's break it down for the listeners here on this edition of the BWI Live Show.
Yeah, so this is what I was trying to explain last year, and I asked James Franklin about this because there are certain schemes or concepts or ideas that you don't see very often because it's hard to do this. So I mentioned Iowa earlier, and like they want to run the ball, right? So they're a team that is going to focus on the offensive line, power, run blocking, size, things like that. They don't then go out and get 5-star athletes that are unguardable on the outside. That's what Oregon does. So Dan Lanning comes over with this SEC mindset of running the football. Big physical offensive line, strong, dynamic run blockers, guys that aren't just big, but also big and athletic, that kind of like legitimate threat in the middle of the field. So if you think of the field in zones, right, you've got the middle of the field, you've got outside the numbers, intermediate and deep, right? So you need to threaten all zones with at least something in your offense, right? And the best way to threaten the middle of the field is running the football. Right? So if you get attacked the middle of the field with the running game, you create a kind of a gravitational field. You have to bring players into the box. Linebackers have to be more aware of their gaps because that line's going to smash you if you don't. And they've got athletic, explosive running backs, not always the biggest guys in the world, but super fast that really fit well into an outside zone system where you make a one-cut explode upfield. Or they like to then fold in some power because of just tactical things you do on defense to prevent outside zone running, right? So you need to have a counter to everything. Don't want to get too deep into that. But then on top of that, what they do is so big power, size in the middle. Then they have 5-star athletes on the outside, right? They're not the biggest guys in the world. 6 feet, 5'11", 190 pounds. I think it's the dream of what Penn State was trying to go for before Marcus Hagans, of these ultra route running guys that get gobs of separation. And what they do is they pair that run game with play actions and RPOs. So you're paying so much attention because you have to pay so much attention to the ground game. And then suddenly you vacate a zone and it's a play action behind you. You get one-on-one with an elite receiver who makes one guy miss and it's an explosive play. So somebody said earlier in the chat, Tez Johnson is gone. They've got 2 or 3 Tez Johnsons. Like they've got 2 or 3 of those guys on the roster. Maybe not with dynamic separation skills like him, but in that ballpark, that's the style of receiver that they go for. They're not looking for the Jeremiah Smiths who are 6'1" to 6'4", 235 pounds. Now, I'm sure they wouldn't turn those guys down, But schematically, that's what they're trying to do. Play action, RPO, screens, really simple things of the offensive line is going this way, and we're going to create conflicts everywhere else where you can't account for all of these things because we're so damn fast. And that's really the conflict in this. It's a yin and a yang of they've got size and they've got speed. And it's not size and speed at every position at the same time, but it is a dangerous mix of the two within this system, which is really simple. Like, the system is fairly simple. It's not super complex, which is what, going back to the quarterback portion of this, if you can make your reads right and your 30% of your diet is RPO, play action, screens, you can operate this as a young quarterback. It becomes then, do you then fold in the correct decisions in the vertical passing game? Do you throw the ball down the field to create that third dimension of, now, not only are we going to threaten you laterally and intermediately, but now you have to worry about over the top. And that's when you get the bonkers style offensive explosiveness. And Dante Moore's got a stronger arm than Dillon Gabriel. He's bigger. He's got more of the talent side of things. It's just going to be, does he have the mental processing to do the whole playbook? Did he learn enough last year under Dillon Gabriel to come in and be a veteran style quarterback, not just a talent at that position? So it's the same thing we saw last year. Like, I don't believe they've changed anything about the style, the scheme, anything. It's just, do these pieces fit what they wanted to do last year? So bringing in those offensive linemen, I mentioned they at least from what I saw in the spring game, the transferred left guard is going to be Emmanuel Pregnon is going to be the left guard. Alex Harkey is going to play right tackle. Isaiah World is like 6'8", 310. He would be a Phil Trautwein offensive lineman. He's going to be playing left tackle. So they got some of that size back on the line after losing a Johnny Cornelius and some of those other guys on the offensive line. The left tackle, for some reason, is escaping me, but another good player that went early in the NFL draft. So that's why it was so important for them to reload on the offensive line and get those guys in the transfer portal, because it's essential to their scheme. It's essential to who they want to be. So that's what I think they've positioned themselves well in terms of replacing the core of the offense with those transfers. And then the receivers need to build upon that and make sure they fill in any gaps that Evan Stewart or any of those guys left, Tez Johnson, with injury or going to the NFL.
Yeah. Z-Man in the chat says, or grow the grass higher in advance, in response to a chat comment from Lanker that said Penn State needs field to look like the rough at Oakmont for that game. They both got to run through it. Don't forget that.
Right.
But,
right.
Yeah, I get it.
These are similar ideas to what Penn State does too, by the way. Like, this is a very similar idea to what Andy Kotelnicki likes to do on offense as well. It's just a little more, I think it's a little more traditional. Andy Kotelnicki is a little more avant-garde with some of the lineups and decisions about who's playing where. But Dan Lanning and Andy Kotelnicki have similar philosophies on offense. So they're going to want that speed. Nick Singleton doesn't want to be running through mud, I promise you.
Right. All right, T. Frank, let's flip it over to take a look at the Oregon Ducks defense, one that Penn State had success against at times in last year's Big Ten title game. What do you make of them heading into the 2025 season?
Yeah, so it's interesting. I find their defense less interesting. It's all about the front. So that's the part I'll start there, is that it's about versatility up front, changing the numbers and the scheme pre and post snap. So what they do and what they really like to do is find guys that have, and this is why they don't have elite speed rushers or guys that are speed only rushers, is because they like to float between an even and odd front and change the blocking angles and the blocking directions, decisions about, okay, I've got this guy, then I got to go to this guy. All those decisions and things you got to understand as an offensive lineman, they want to change that at the snap or right before the snap, or even sometimes post snap, although not as much. They don't stunt as much as they like to shift, which is to now say, like, we have a nose tackle. Nope, just kidding. Now he's over here as a 1 tech. We have a 3 tech. Never mind. Now he's playing over the tackle. And this is a 5-man front. They like to blend 5, 3, and 4-man fronts to make your offensive line make mistakes. That's really what it is. Tackles for loss and stops, because they get free runners in the backfield, or your offensive linemen don't combo and double team to the right people. That's really a part of this conversation about what they're trying to do along the defensive line. And then everything flows from that. The coverage umbrella is pretty, I don't want to say it's pretty basic. It's pretty basic. They play a lot of quarters, so they're too high defense. They keep both safeties deep. They want to prevent explosive plays that way. and they're willing to give you numbers up front because that D-line is going to control your run game. And you see why Penn State was able to run on them last year, because the D-line for Oregon did not control that game, which was a huge upset, given that they had all that talent on the D-line. And Penn State was able to run into boxes where there were not enough defenders for the number of players they had on the line of scrimmage for their styles. So again, this is going to be the same. Like, the matchup isn't going to change. It's just, do they have the players up front to actually stop Penn State? Have they come up with enough wrinkles to slow down Penn State's running game and how aggressive they were with that outside zone? So from there, it's just kind of what is the defensive front? How are they playing it? It's all about the D-line. It's all about the big men in the trenches for Oregon. And then, again, they have elite speed talent in the secondary. They bring in a 5-star corner. They bring in highly rated Big Ten safeties and corners to fill out that depth chart of, okay, now we're going to keep a lid on anything deep. We're going to play man coverage, and we're going to play quarters, which, if you're playing a vertical system, turns into man coverage, essentially. So you have all of this versatility within the system, where this is more of preventative, it feels like at times, in terms of, we're going to keep a lid on things. It's not a defense that's trying to dictate and dominate all that much from a pressure perspective or from a coverage obscurity perspective, like a Jim Knowles who's trying to change the math and take the ball away. To me, there's a lot more simple, play fast. And again, if you can recruit anybody you want, and you can go into the portal and get anybody you want, you can play simple schemes real fast. So Oregon has a distinct advantage in that situation, where they can go out and acquire any player they need, within reason, obviously, but not within the same reason other teams do. So that's kind of just a refresh of who they are, what they're going to be. I think the questions for them are that D-line and that box. Do they have that would be, at least on paper and right now, a massive advantage for Penn State in terms of what they have returning, what they lost, and if some of the guys in the portal that they brought in are actually going to be the players that replace those players. I don't know that that's a matchup that Penn State is afraid of. So that would be a strong indicator for Penn State. If they're rolling early in the game, they're going to have an opportunity to battle with Oregon in that whiteout game.
Penn State currently 8-1 to win the college football playoff championship game at FanDuel. Oregon 9-1. So, as you probably have gathered if you've been listening along the whole show here, and you just didn't skip to this part of it, or just tune in if you were checking us out live, there's not a ton that separate these two teams, and the questions that the way the questions that do are answered will determine who wins this game. Penn State will, of course, have the home field advantage. We all realize that, since it will be a whiteout game. Oregon, again, has plenty to replace, but certainly a team that will come to Penn State with a very good chance, maybe not a great one. We'll have to wait and see what this looks like on, not just on paper, but on the field, but comes to Penn State with a chance to win. Penn State will be favored in that game unless something changes personnel-wise between now and then. And so it should be a good one. It is shaping up to be an early season classic. There is no doubt about that.
Yeah, I think these are two well-equipped teams to do what they want to do, and that it's going to be who does it best and who has the best plan of within what we just described of Oregon and what they want to do. So during the Big Ten championship game, what got Penn State is Oregon likes to run tempo, so they like to go fast in between plays. They also added in the wrinkle, they started doing a lot of tackle over, 6-man offensive lines, unbalanced, and Penn State, they hadn't done that a whole lot that year, and it caught Penn State off guard. Do they have that in the bag during September as opposed to December during that week off you had for the Big Ten championship game to plan? And so I think Penn State has an advantage of that extra bye week and all those things leading into the game. But both of these teams, I think, schematically, coaching, intelligence, talent, should be a really good game.
It's Thomas Frank Carr's breakdown of Penn State, Oregon in September. Obviously, we'll talk a lot more about that game moving forward, but it's time for the mailbag portion of the show. Before that, though, I want to remind you that if you join BlueWhiteIllustrated.com, where it's just $1 for the first week and then build annually from there, you can find our subscription options at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com. You would have had the chance to not only ask your mailbag question already, but also potentially have it answered, or answered if we don't get to it on the show later today on the Lions Den message board. So one of the many reasons to join us at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com, the latest recruiting and transfer portal intel, premium team news, and more from our team at Blue White Illustrated, where, again, it's $1 for the first week and then build annually from there. So consider joining us today at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com. T. Frank, let's get to the mailbag, which we have a graphic for, and I can't find it. There it is. All right, so the mailbag is open here on this July 2nd edition of the Blue White Illustrated live show. So feel free, if you're watching live, to drop your questions in the comments. We'll get to as many of them as we can after we get to the ones we have. And by fair warning, the first question T. Frank may still be talking on July 4th about. So I read this one this morning and thought to myself, man, if there was ever a question made for T. Frank, it is this one. So let's get to it. If I can scroll properly here we go. All right. Towson Knit asks, curious what you both think the use cases for 12 personnel will be for the Penn State offense this year, specifically given the options available in the tight end room. On one hand, given the running back and offensive line situation, one could reasonably expect another 3,000 yards on the ground this year, and especially if you play as late as the college football playoff semifinals. On the other hand, do you limit the development of your vertical passing game if you're too successful running out of heavy sets? I'll leave it up on the screen for anyone that wants to read it who's watching on YouTube. But T. Frank, take it away, buddy. This was, again, if there was ever a question made for you, it's this one.
Yeah, Towson Knit, one of the best on the board. I don't have favorites, but he's definitely one of them. Expert in the DMV in terms of like the recruiting and everything there. And this is a really thoughtful question because I think this was Penn State's biggest flaw last year in terms of its ability to generate explosive plays and vertical passing. And what he's talking about here is 12 personnel, two tight ends on the field. I mentioned like Oregon wants to create threats in the middle of the field, right? So your running game, tight ends operate in the middle of the field too. So yes, you can put them in the slot. You can move them out a little bit, but tight ends are middle of the field weapons. So what's threatening on the outside? What's threatening vertically and outside? And that is a real problem for certain teams that try to run the football and run out of 12 personnel. The goal of tight ends is that they are a mismatch weapon. You can be explosive with them down the field, in the passing game, and as run blockers. So I think the use case here might be incrementally better in the vertical passing sense. So just hear me out on this. And I know I've mentioned this here before on the show, and it's going to sound like sacrilege, but Tyler Warren didn't run a 40 during his pro day. Like there's a reason he didn't run before the NFL Combine. We all know he's not running in the 4.5s, right? His game is different. And I've talked about this on the show. I've talked about this offseason. The vertical element and the explosive tackle breaking, taking a 15-yard RPO slant and turning it into a 60-yard play, it's harder with a tight end. That being said, Luke Reynolds is a vertical threat. If there's a guy who's going to get down the field and get you a 25-yard pass, maybe it's a contested catch, maybe it's just down the seam, I think it's Luke Reynolds. And honestly, Khalil Dinkins, I think he can be that guy as well. He did a lot of the dirty work last year. So you've got two vertical elements this year that you didn't necessarily have last year. But to me, the point is, are you stretching the field enough to create those windows for Drew Aller? Because tight ends generally, and this is just a general statement, from what I've observed, create smaller windows unless they're absurd, right? Unless they're absolutely absurd. Penn State schemed Tyler Warren open a lot. If you scheme a receiver open and suddenly you've got a receiver who runs a 4.5, even as a slow receiver, let's go a little bit faster. Let's say they run a 4.3 or a 4.4. That guy running in space, the whole Oregon conversation, is more dangerous than a guy who runs a 4.5. Now, there's other ways to generate yards after catch, explosive plays with tackle breaking, that kind of thing. I'm in favor of more balance in the offense between 12 and 11 personnel. Penn State was more dominant with tight ends, and 12 personnel is a little narrow because you can also have 3 tight ends on the field, right? You can have 3 running backs on the field. Penn State will have those packages at times this year as well. So if you count everything that isn't 3 receivers, it was skewed heavily towards that in the Penn State offense in a relative sense, in the sense that I think it was still 48% or 45% 11 personnel. But the effectiveness of those plays and those players, I think you have to invest in that. And Andy Kotelnicki, James Franklin, they've talked about that more this year, where you don't have one, again, gravitational force of Tyler Warren is demanding the ball. It's almost like you can't throw it anywhere else. Now they don't have that, and I think they need to establish more credibility and balance to those 3 receiver sets. Part of it because they've got a lot of talented slot receivers. I still think Devontae Ross is going to get targets from the slot, and you're going to get Trevor Pena, who's a high volume target guy, from the slot. So you need to have 3 receivers on the field to have a slot receiver. And a lot of those guys still, their skills are better suited to that than playing on the outside. They're outside receivers. They're traditional bigger guys that can win in press and win in man coverage. Those are still young players on the roster. So, yeah, I think they need to invest more in running from those 11 personnel sets and being effective there, and also having explosive passing out of those. Because I think that gives you what we were talking about with Oregon of threats all over. Your threat indicator in all those areas, it's more diverse if you have more packages and more 11 personnel influence on your team. Yeah.
Next up on our list from the mailbag, T. Frank, question comes from Scott L. What is the one position where Penn State cannot afford an injury? I am going to take quarterback off the list. You cannot say quarterback.
I was going to say that. I was going to say let's not do Drew Aller, right?
Yeah, because obviously if any team loses their top quarterback, especially when he is considered one of the top, if not the top returning quarterback in the country, you have major problems. So, T. Frank, I'll give you first pick. Besides quarterback, what's the one position this Penn State football team cannot afford an injury in 2025?
Okay. I'm going to give you my honorable mention.
Okay.
And it's Drew Shelton at left tackle.
Okay.
They have the tackle talent where they could insert Anthony Donko or Nolan Rucci or whomever at that left tackle position. There's no proven talent behind your most important offensive lineman at left tackle. Drew Shelton has been taking all the reps there. He has been the guy at left tackle for a long time now. I know Egan Boyer is talented. I know everyone's excited for him. I still don't think you want to be playing a redshirt freshman in a very important season. But because they've got all of that extra depth at tackle, it's probably not the guy. I'm going to go with... do you want Zane Durant or do you want Denai Dennis Sutton? Which one of those two do you want?
You run with it. I'll run as followed.
Okay, I'm going to go Zane Durant. Because I don't see anyone that can replicate what he does on the inside. Now, I don't see anybody that can replicate what Dennis Sutton does on the outside. There's just more guys. It's easier to play as a little bit younger on the edge as opposed to at defensive tackle. We've seen teams really struggle when they have to go super young at defensive tackle. Zane Durant is the bulwark against that and has the opportunity to be the team's legitimate number 2 pass rusher if he reaches the heights of his talent this year. And I know that we're talking about D-end a little bit later, but if you have a guy on the interior that's providing you pressure, then it doesn't matter as much about that outside pressure if you've got 2 guys that are getting you the quarterback. And so I'll go Zane Durant as the most indispensable that you can't lose, but I'm having a hard time not having Denai Dennis Sutton be the answer here either.
Well, we're going to make the answer to your answer to the question, and the defensive line being the most important position group. Yeah. And that way you get both. That seems like a fun way to play this game.
Yeah.
And I'll just take the other one quickly. Linebacker is a position where James Franklin felt it was necessary to sit at the podium in the post-game interview after the Beaver Stadium game, or the Blue-White game, rather, at Beaver Stadium, and said that they felt like Penn State needed another linebacker because of losing Tamir Robinson to USC. So they went and got one, of course, Amari Campbell from North Carolina. But certainly if you would lose anyone at that position group, you're down to the same number you were at before. So linebacker, an easy pick there as well. I think we covered all the obvious bases. And quarterback, defensive line, linebacker, certainly check all the boxes in terms of the things you would be looking for when trying to answer Scott's question.
Sneaky one there is safety. I don't know if there's anyone who can replace what I expect them to do with Ziki Wheatley in this defense. So that would be structurally probably more devastating to the plan than if you lose Zane Durant but the talent there and then the disparity gap is just a little bit more stark because you can move some stuff around and maybe Dejon Lane becomes an elite player, like he breaks out this year and you would have like a replacement sort of like it's a little bit wonky, but yeah, that would be the only other player I would put on the short list of guys that are irreplaceable, at least as far as I see it so far.
All right, I'm going to make the last mailbag question we have time for here today, T. Frank, the question of the day.
You're such a quick learner. I love it. And then, did his audio go out for everybody or just me?
All right, how we doing now?
There we go. Okay. Whew.
Okay. I can't hear you. I'm hoping you can hear me. I'm going to read this question, and if not, you won't be able to hear me, so you can just cut me off. D-line depth, Poncho asks, after the latest roster updates, who has positioned themselves well enough to earn the spots at defensive end 3, 4, and 5 and defensive tackle 3, 4, and 5?
Yeah, I think Greg's, I think his headphones died right here at the end. So I'll just answer this and then I'll take us out. After the latest roster updates, I think Owen Wafel is a guy that's going to have a good opportunity to be part of the defensive tackle rotation. He's somebody that I think has a role within the team. And that's really what I'm looking at, is not guys that are going to start or breakout stars, but guys that can contribute in a specific way. And then I think the DNs are really TBD. There's a lot of we need to see still about a guy like Malachi Williams. Saw a little bit of him this year. Ivan Kamaju still needs time to develop if you're looking for one of those young guys that has to be pushed up the depth chart. The obvious one is Jalen Harvey. But I don't know that we have an answer just because guys got bigger. And Poncho 570 asked a good question because that's where it starts. But it's not just when you're looking at guys like that, it's not just that where it starts. We also need the other half of the information with did they get better? Do they know how to play football at a higher level than they did last year as redshirt freshmen or as true freshmen who enrolled early? So there's a little bit of mystery around the DN still, which now that I'm saying all these things out loud probably makes Denai Sutton the real answer to our previous question about the least or the most irreplaceable who you don't want to lose. And I know that the chat thought that was bad juju. So I apologize to the chat for saying, hey, we're going to talk about the question somebody asked, but somebody asked it, so we got to answer it. Greg, can you hear me now? Are you back? No. Okay. So here's what we're going to do. I'll take us out, and Greg, you can just sit there and smile because we got to get going. We honestly, his headphones did the job. He got an hour in. I wasn't expecting that. I was expecting this to happen a little bit earlier. We're coming back with the recruiting show tomorrow, Thursday, wrapping up this show. Obviously, there's not going to be anything on July 4th because it's a Friday, but of course, there is more stuff going on this weekend for Penn State football. A lot of decisions that are down the way in recruiting. If they break Penn State's way, we will have videos about it here on the Blue White Illustrated YouTube channel. Great time to remind you to subscribe because, it's not the last time you're going to hear from us for July. We'll have more previews coming up next week, digging into probably Ohio State. That one's a little bit trickier. It did a lot of things changed for the Buckeyes. So I'll be taking as much time as I can to learn about Matt Patricia and Brian Hartline and what they bring to the table as defensive coordinators and offensive coordinators. I don't think even Penn State knows at this point. There's a lot of mystery around the Buckeyes. We'll talk about it next week here on the BWI Live Show. We'll talk to you then.